The winter has a radiant, soft glow from the white snow on barren trees surrounding the frozen, empty lakes. But that's just it. It seems bare from short glances. There isn't much color, especially without the light when one is living around or above the 55 latitude line, whether it's near the northern Arctic Circle or in the southern Antarctic. Either way, you may only get 1 to 3 hours of daylight, and then the clouds above the snow flurries coat the rest in a gray fog. What's really magical is when, in the midst of snowflakes and the stifling silence, you see a picking green, a hint of red, calling attention to a tree branch. It's special, calming. It makes you glad that the world's not quite dead. The frozen world isn't the only area where nature and color are celebrated. While not having the same winter weather connotations, the people in Egypt would often bring nature into the household. The evidence of this is readily seen in temples, palaces, and tombs, since they are the most likely to survive the centuries. But these celebrate the hard work that is put into everyday lives, and the value of its beauty in the afterlife. Extra color can always help too when you're basically surrounded by desert. My name is Renee Whitehouse. You're listening to Detours in Archaeology. This week, let's take a detour into Evergreen is the Mistletoe. Happy holidays. Holly, ivy, pine, fir tree boughs, and mistletoe are the most commonly used while decorating for winter celebrations because of their evergreenness. Sometimes symbolizing eternal life and fertility, particularly the sprigs of mistletoe. They appeared in ancient celebrations around the world, a much easier feat when a closely connected collection of species grows naturally in tropical and temperate ecosystems around the world. The mistletoe genus itself is a semi-parasitic plant called hemiparasites that are important aspects of the forest that they grow in. Because I grew in a house full of wily cats, my parents never hung mistletoe because of its toxic effects. I was confused as to why people kissed underneath collections of a dead plant. Seemed counterintuitive, just a weird tradition that I only ever saw in movies and TV. Even mythologically speaking, I had always heard that the mistletoe was the weapon that Loki used to kill Balder. While the tale I originally heard is not wrong, just like so many other mythological stories, they have innumerable variations with lead-ins from all the cultures that influence the story's origin and evolution. The stories and tradition that we know are from somewhere obscure, whether they were long-told tales of gods or important based on how they were first used. But I'll cover a bit of the ecological significance first. There may be a common misconception that mistletoe berries are red, but they're white, though sometimes it does vary based on a particular species. See Vishum cruchatum for an example. Holly berries are the red berries in wintertime decorations. This could just be my projecting assumption when I see various articles and pictures online explicitly explaining the differences. The color differentiation, however, does appear in the mythical context, but I'll cover that in the next section. Mistletoe has soft and thick round leaves, white berries, grows on trees, and is parasitic. Holly has spiky rubbery leaves, grows in a bush, and have red berries. The English word for the plant mistletoe is derived from a defunct Anglo-Saxon dialect. It derives of the two words, the older form of mistle and the Old English word ton, meaning twig. Mistle is the common Germanic connotation from the Old High German mistil, the Middle High German mistil, the Old English mistel, and the Old Norse mistil, all of which means dung. This origin is believed to be based on the ancient peoples noticing that mistletoe generally sprouts from bird droppings on tree plants and grew into a collection of twigs. The words were conjoined, and the mashup of mistletoe evolved over time into the modern mistletoe. The berry seed is often eaten by birds and tree-climbing animals, so when excreted by any of these animals, the sticky seeds will cling to the branches near the tops of the bushes or their preferred base trees. As the semi-parasitic plants grow, the specialized shallow roots, called hastoreum, absorb food, minerals, and water from the base plant, while also producing their own food through photosynthesis in their evergreen leaves. As the plant still uses the sun, it most commonly and heavily grows in tropical and subtropical climates. Mistletoe can, and does, grow almost everywhere in the world. Varieties of the genera taxon grow naturally in the Americas, British Isles, Africa, and Europe, all the way to Asia, Australia, and New Zealand. Because mistletoe is a general name for a collection of the parasitic in the taxonomic order Zontales, to be more specific, the main mistletoe species that are used in Christmas decorations are limited and mostly stick to the varieties that were found in Europe and England, which connects much more directly to the folklore that inspired the modern-day traditions. When researching this topic, the main mythological context I could find is the story of the death of Balder from Norse mythology, and it's being written about death. So I will quickly summarize the straight story. Balder is described as a perfect god, a god of fertility and yet purity, light, and the summer sun. This major story begins with Balder having prophetic dreams of his death. His mother, Frigg, or sometimes Frigga, Odin's wife, not wanting her favorite son to die, went to everything in existence, purportedly, to obtain a promise from each thing to never harm Balder. Quoted from Broder's translation of the Gylfaginning 22, the second son of Odin is Baldur, and good things are to be said of him. He is best, and all praise him. He is so fair of feature and so bright that light shines from him. A certain herb is so white that it is likened to Baldur's brow. Of all grass it is the whitest, and by it thou mayest judge his fairness, both in hair and in the body. He is the wisest of the Aesir, and the fairest spoken and most gracious. And that quality attends him, that none may gainsay his judgments. He dwells in a place called Breidablik, which is heaven. In that place may nothing unclean be. Frigg asked everything except mistletoe, who is argued to have either been too young or because it did not grow up from the ground. But the original reason for this oversight is generally unknown and has been largely speculated upon. While at a typical Aesir feast, most of the gods are playing the game of throwing everything at Balder because nothing could hurt him anymore. Loki, in his trickster nature, is pissed off, maybe a little jealous, and just wants to mess everything up. He either shapeshifts or illusions himself into an elderly woman and talks to Frigg about how Balder could be immune to all damage. Frigg, in a not smart moment, tells old lady Loki that she got promises from everything except mistletoe to never harm Balder. With this fascinatingly specific information, old lady Loki fashions an arrow or a spear made of mistletoe, or the point coated in the berries, and gives it to Hod or Halldor, Balder and Thor's blind brother. After presumably moping in a corner because he's missing out on all the weapon destruction fun, old lady Loki hands him the weapon and points Halldor in Balder's direction. As can be expected, the mistletoe kills Balder after piercing his heart, as was also foreseen by the vulva. As a plot element that Frigg knew that I did not mention before now, but was relayed in the Vulspa as part of the Poetic Edda. In stanza 32, the vulva says that she has seen the fate of Baldur as the bleeding god. In the Henry Adams Bellows translation, I saw for Baldur the bleeding god, the son of Othin his destiny set. Famous and fair in the lofty fields, full grown in strength the mistletoe stood. After Baldur's death, the story variations can split. In some versions, Loki gets caught immediately, while in others he gets away with it until later. In later myths, he admits his misdeeds while pompously bragging. Either way, the resulting punishment is being chained to a large rock and having a snake drip venom into his eyes. Luckily for Loki, his wife holds a bowl over his face catching the venom until she has to leave to empty the bowl. And that's what is said to cause earthquakes. Going back to the protagonist characters, either Frigg can bring her son back from hell after 3 days, which may be a Christianized edition, or the more common version of not succeeding in resurrecting him at all. In this version, Frigg travels to Hell, both to the place and to the goddess of death who rules over the place, just like Hades in Hades. But she begs that Hel should free her son. Hel agrees, but on one condition. Everything under the sun must weep for him. Without much prompting, all of the promise givers wept, especially the mistletoe. I wonder if it felt guilty. But on the final day before the body was cremated at Baldur's funeral, there appeared the giantess Sak, which also means thanks in Icelandic. She refused to cry and even laughed at the idea that she would be the last hope to bring him back. She is thought by several scholars to actually have been Loki in disguise. This part of the story aligns more with the version that Loki is not captured directly with Baldur's death, but if Loki is in disguise, why didn't anyone ask, "Where's Loki?" Then if he cried already, even crocodile tears, why wouldn't that have worked? Maybe he would have gotten caught after the funeral because of this mischief, but its history is so twisted, there aren't any direct records. Connected to the poem on how great Baldur was, it's important to understand that Baldur is primarily known for the story of his death, which is seen as the first step into a chain of events that will ultimately lead to the death of most gods and the cyclical destruction of the world's current iteration in Ragnarok. According to the Voldspa, Baldur will return to the New World to rule alongside Thor's son and his brother Hodor, which may have been the secret that Odin whispered in Baldur's ear while he lay in his funeral barge. This, the first stanza describing Baldur, also demonstrates that it's not certain that what we know currently as mistletoe was the plant used to kill Baldur in the first place. Baldur's bow, or specifically Riporaspormum inodorum, can be identified as the scentless mayweed and the sea mayweed, both of which are called Baldursbrá and are found in Iceland, northern England, and in Germany. The similar-looking lily of the valley is known as Weissebadren. The color of the berries appears in some versions of the myth as well. In some of the iterations, Frigg weeps over the sprigs of mistletoe with their, at the time, red berries, and her sorrow of not being able to bring her son back is enough power to turn them white, which is then enough magic to bring Baldur back, which led to Frigg reversing the bad rep that mistletoe gained. I found this information in a Medium's blog, which isn't the best to find and cite sources, since she didn't have any, and as they are all slight variations on the main myth, I thought it would be interesting to do a comparison with any that I could find. So either way, it's an interesting story, even if it's not ancient. But either that, or it was because she brought Baldur back that she wept with such joy and such power to turn the berries white. Or that act created the white berries in the first place. Even the universal weeping path of the myth has a Christianization slant, because that portion of the tale wasn't in the older Voldspa text, the first epic poem in the Prose Edda. Though, of course, with centuries in between, it's difficult to know exactly when stories changed or who influenced what. But continuity in myth isn't the important message. It's more about why the people in these cultures are investing their time into this particular plant and their traditions, because as we know, traditions change. In the 1898 edition of the Brewer's Dictionary of Phrase and Fable states, "The mistletoe was placed in future under the care of Frigga, and was never again to be an instrument of evil till it touched the earth, the empire of Loki. It is always suspended from ceilings, and when persons of opposite sexes pass under it, they give each other the kiss of peace and love, in the full assurance that the epiphyte is no longer an instrument of mischief." Looking at fertility versus making amends, with the oak tree being crowned with the poisonous plant, the connection was made to these hemiparasitic plants living off each other, and were celebrated as the embodiment of Baldur and his remembrance. The mistletoe's plant seeds are very sticky for them to catch and cling onto high branches, of which the oak tree is the particular natural favorite. The stickiness is reasoned to be the connecting thread between the seeds to semen, and thus male fertility and masculine fertility gods, and not only from the Scandinavian cultural area. Baldur died, but a lesson was learned. Never forget about the mistletoe. Mistletoe would come to hang over our doors as a reminder to never forget. We kiss beneath it to remember what Baldur's wife and mother forgot. At least that is one version of the origin of our relationship with mistletoe. done 2011. The people who followed and continue to follow this culture idea used a sprig or later a woven ball of berries as a symbol of peace and love. So depending on which version of the myth one ends with, it leads to interpretations between whether the mistletoe itself is regarded as having received a blessing or punishment when they have to watch couples kiss underneath. Either way, the end is the same. They are hung over doorways to remind people to love and appreciate one another. Whether seen and or reimagined as a pre-Christian fertility god, a Christ-like figure by those interpreting the circa 1220 Icelandic collections of the prose and poetic Eddas, or as a real person in battles taking place before the written sources in the 12th century CE by the Danish historian Saxo Grammaticus, aka Saxo Conaiome Longus, in the Gesta Danorum of the Danish Latin chronicles, the Chronicum Latrense, and the Annales Lundenses, written in the 12th and 13th centuries. Looking further back in time, however, there are other possible historic connections to legendary figures that Baldur could have been inspired by, or just named for. These texts include Anglo-Saxon chronicles, in which Baldur is the head of a monarchy, written in Old English in the 9th century, and possibly the 3rd, 4th century, in the 3rd, 4th century Urect inscription, although of course scholars do dispute those interpretations. In any case, whatever the interpretation of Baldur, research into cultures of overlapping regions show that the use and veneration of mistletoe is older than the Vikings' overtation of England and Gaul, and older than the region's transition to Christianization. The Celtic Druidic area was one such example where the mistletoe was venerated and used as a useful medicine in ancient times. This practice likely came about through trial and error, but would be expected to work based on the etymology of the ancient Druidic word for mistletoe, which meant all healing. The knowledge of these characteristics would have undoubtedly contributed to the mystical nature of the mistletoe, and especially pertaining to its ability to cure infertility. With a bunch of different distinct Gaelic languages and even more dialects, it's hard to tell one distinct word. But interestingly, while Irish Gaelic has the words drualus, which happens to also be the word druid in Lithuanian, sudarach, and uaise for mistletoe, Ireland is not a place where mistletoe is extremely widespread. However, on the island next door, the Scotch Gaelic Druids have the similar word uil-uk, which means mistletoe and placenta, a cure to all disease, and the derived term diach an uil-uk translates to potion, owing to the use of the plant. Lucian, Pliny the Elder, and Tacitus mention the sacred groves of the Celts, where assemblies were held, and it's believed that the Latin word druids was derived from the Greek word drus for oak. Professor Bernhard Mayer has said that it is more likely that the word was derived from the Gaulish druids, representing an old Celtic compound dru for tree, especially oak, and wid, which means to know. Hence, druids are they who know the oak. Whether connected or most likely not, it's interesting to have both Norse peoples and druids celebrating the oak tree. Pliny the Elder also wrote about the Druids as an anthropologist of his time and had the desire to observe and learn about different cultures. Readers could tell he was definitely of his time because he would call people that he described as barbarians, and yet, coincidentally, they had similar traditions while only calling them different names. In his 1st century text Natural History, he described the ritual as such. We should not omit to mention the great admiration that the Gauls have for it as well. The Druids, that is what they call their magicians, hold nothing more sacred than the mistletoe and the tree on which it is growing, provided it is a hard-timbered oak. Mistletoe is rare, and when found, it is gathered with great ceremony, and particularly on the 6th day of the half moon. Hailing the moon in a native word means healing all things. They prepare a ritual sacrifice and banquet beneath the tree and bring up 2 white bulls, whose horns are bound for the first time on this occasion. A priest arrayed with white vestments climbs the tree and with the golden sickle cuts down the missile, which is caught in a white cloak. then finally kill the victims, praying to a god to render his gift propitious to those on whom he has bestowed it. They believe that the mistletoe given in drink will impart fertility to any animal that is barren, and that it is an antidote to all poisons. The celebration that Pliny was discussing was for Midsummer's Eve. The Celtic Druids' tradition of climbing the oak trees with golden sickles to collect mistletoe would celebrate the start of autumn when the days would shorten to be less than the nights. Most trees would lose their leaves, but the mistletoe would not. After the collection of plants of the golden boughs, the plants and animals, especially 2 sacred white bulls, would be sacrificed and burnt to get through the long winters. Pliny the Elder further wrote, "Of itself the robur oak is selected by them to form full groves, and they perform none of their religious rites without employing branches of it, so much so that the priests themselves may probably have received their name from the Greek name for that tree." And Ovid, a contemporary of Pliny the Elder, referred to the Druid songs beneath the oak ad viscum druidae cantar solebant, along with their dance around the oak to the tune of "Hey Derry down, 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 Derry," which means "in a circle move we around the oak." The Derry meaning the oak tree, which they are still sometimes called today. Also according to Dunn in 2011, another story begins with Druids who viewed the mistletoe as magical and hung it above their doors for luck. Others say it is hung for fertility. The seeds of mistletoe are sticky like semen. Similar to the Norse culture, young men have the privilege of kissing the girls under the mistletoe, plucking each time a berry from the bush. When all the berries are plucked, the plucked privilege ceases, as Washington Irving wrote in the 1800s. In the Hellenistic or Greco-Roman period, the festival for the celebration of the Roman god Saturn, or he's more commonly known by his Greek equivalent Kronos, is Saturnalia specifically, is held from the 17th of December to the 23rd. The Brumalia is more of a collection of winter celebrations and a larger conglomeration of god worship during the winter months, including Saturn/Cronus, Ceres/Demeter, and Bacchus/Dionysus. It is thought to start around November 24th and go for the next month, encompassing Saturnalia's festivals. Its influence is still felt in the celebration of Christmas and in the Western world's New Year. It was the most celebrated festival of the year, with all the work and business being suspended. Slaves were given temporary freedom to say and do what they wanted, certain moral restrictions were eased, and presents were freely exchanged. They too associated the mistletoe with peace, love, and understanding, and hung it over doorways to protect the household. Hanging mistletoe with other evergreens was part of the Saturnalia festival, as the agricultural life of the deity was being venerated. The Roman celebration has been equated to the Greek holiday Krona, another form for Cronus, which was celebrated during the Attic month of Hecatombaion in late midsummer. In both instances, the stories told of the mythological figures led to the desire for peace and love and the exchanging of kisses under the mistletoe. As an aside, I find it utterly intangibly maddening that the Druidic people would cut down the holly branches with a golden sickle, while Greeks and Romans were celebrating the god of agriculture, Cronus, who is known for wielding a sickle, although his was usually made of adamantium. But within the same area, like the fact that they were connected to, within the same area where stories tell us that the mistletoe plant itself is called the golden bough, who is known for wielding a sickle, although Cronus's is usually made of adamantine. But these are all within the same, even distantly connected area where stories tell us that the mistletoe plant itself is called the golden bough. The first Roman emperor Caesar Augustus, who reigned between 27 BCE and 14 CE, wanted to implant the idea that he was fit to rule due to his divine and heroic ancestors. And what's a better way to sway the people than to say, you know these amazingly intelligent Greeks? Well, that time they thought they defeated Troy, my answer was following a prophecy leading to the founding of Rome. In Virgil's Aeneid, Aeneas did everything the Greek heroes of the Iliad and the Odyssey did, and better. As part of the Aeneid, the epic poem published as a collection of books by Virgil between 29 and 19 BCE, the main and title character Aeneas searches for the Golden Bough after searching for and then finding the landmass of Italy, influenced by the tale of Jason and the Argonauts getting the Golden Fleece. But it has different connotations of the purpose. Instead of searching for treasure or notoriety, Aeneas was told by the 700-year-old woman, the Sibyl of Cumae Delphoba, at the Temple of Apollo, that she would be his escort into the underworld to see the shade of his deceased father. In Book 6 of the ancient Roman mythology, mistletoe was used by the hero Aeneas to reach the palace of the underworld. From the Aeneid, Book 6, one bough it bears, but wondrous to behold, the ductile rind and leaves of radiant gold. This from the vulgar branches must be torn, and to fair prosper in the present born. And the walls of Pluto's palace are in view, the gate and the iron arch above it stands on anvils labored by the Cyclops' hands. Before our farther way the fates allow, here we must fix on high the golden bough. As quick translations, the single golden bough has to be taken from the tree and given to Proserpine, the Roman name for Persephone, and the travelers can see the gate, the iron arch, and the walls of Pluto/Hades' underworld palace, but before going in, they have to get the golden bough. Before moving through Pluto's palace, Aeneas put the golden bough on the arched door and was able to get through to the sunny and green Elysian fields, the abode of those who led just and useful lives. Here, Aeneas was able to visit with his father Anchises. Anchises then told his son about the nearby river Lethe, the river of forgetfulness, and that on the other side there are spirits waiting to be born on earth. Some of them would be the descendants of Aeneas, and others who would live in the future Roman Empire, such as Romulus, the mythological founder of Rome, and Remus, his brother, who he kills, Camillus, Marcellus, and the Caesars. Anchises finally advises Aeneas before leading him to the Ivory Gate, one of the gates of sleep by which they return to Earth. One possible inspiration for this part of the myth may have come from the Greek myth of Persephone and Hades, because Demeter, or Ceres in Rome, Persephone's mother, was so distraught at the loss of her daughter that she canceled spring. A deal had to be made between both parties, which ended with Persephone living with her uncle and husband. It's a myth, try not to question it, leading to the fall and winter seasons in our world, and half the year living on the human plane, leading to spring and summer. Persephone was one of the few who could easily travel between the realms, and according to some sources, it was her wand, created from mistletoe, that she used to unlock and relock the gates as she went back and forth. Another group of myths from ancient Greece of mistletoe shows the plant not only as a means of travel between the realms, but also possesses the healing power to resurrect the dead, and comes from the story of Asclepius. Asclepius, who is the son of the sun god Apollo and Coronis, was prematurely born after he was saved while his mother was burnt in divine fire as punishment after being unfaithful to Apollo while she was pregnant. While still a baby, Asclepius was left in the care of Chiron the centaur, who is the trainer of Heracles, and grew up mastering the art of healing. The stories say he had such a natural affinity and extreme talent that he became one of the greatest healers ever, as reflected in his myth of bringing the dead back to life. While shut up in the house of Glaucus, Asclepius was tasked with healing a man who had already died. In his zoning out while wondering how he would do that, a snake crawled up his staff and he freaked out, shook it off, and bashed it to death. Another snake, the mate of the first, came in holding a magic herb in its mouth, which it tapped on the dead one's head, causing it to come back to life. The snakes left in peace and left the herb behind. Again, myth. Which Asclepius picked up and used to resurrect the completely healed Glaucus. Supposedly the herb that was brought by the snakes was mistletoe, and historian Robert Graves has translated the name Asclepius to that which hangs from the esculent oak, meaning mistletoe. Interesting parallels between the story of the Golden Fleece and Golden Bough and Druidic customs that include the two white bullets in the Midsummer Festival and in the search for the Golden Fleece were in what's possibly the original version written in 462 BCE. The poet Pindar used the quest for the golden fleece in his fourth Pythian ode, even though the fleece is not the main goal. When King Aetes challenges Jason to yoke the fire-breathing bulls, the fleece is the prize. Quoted, as translated by Nicholson 2000, "Let the king do this, the captain of the ship. Let him do this, I say, and have for his own the immortal coverlet, the fleece, glowing with matted skins of gold." In a later version, Phrixus, a father to two of the Argonauts and a future king as the son of Athmas, king of Boeotia, along with becoming the king of Colchis after marrying Calliope, the daughter of King Aetes, the son of the sun god Helios, and settling down in her father's house on Colchis. Phrixus sacrificed the ram to Poseidon and gave the revered golden fleece to Aetes, who hung it up in an oak in a grove sacred to Ares, the god of war, and then made it defended by bulls with hooves of brass and breath of fire, or a dragon serpent, or both. Because this is mythology, and the generational changes are mucked up by demigods and just seemingly random alterations, there are 3 generations, at least, involved in the Golden Fleece story. Either way, the fleece is hung up from an oak tree or hung in an archway to celebrate life, fertility, and love, as in the all-healing Grecian/Roman/Druidic mistletoe medicine. In the Middle Ages, after the 3rd century CE, Christianity became widespread in Europe, and the religious or mystic respect for the mistletoe plant was integrated to an extent into the new religion. Tainter, 2002. For a time, however, because of the burgeoning hatred of magic and all things non-Christian, the mistletoe plant was banned from churches due to the belief that it has special ties to fertility and the frivolous nature of the traditions, and to its connections to pagan rituals instead of existing as remembrance of the Baldur's peace, protection, and love, but more as a game of kissing and or marrying women off. Because if you denied a kiss to a man, you wouldn't get marriage proposals in the next year. It was, however, sometimes still hung from doorways of churches to stave off evil. More specifically, it was cut, tied in branches, and hung from the front of cottages to scare away passing demons, and was hung over doors of stables to protect horses and cattle against witchcraft. According to Tainter, in Sweden, it was kept in houses to prevent fire, and in Italy, it was believed to be able to extinguish fire, which may have been a traded holdover from the Celtic idea of the mistletoe protecting against thunder and lightning, or at least appeasing the god of them. These were deemed acceptable because they were in symbols of the cross that Jesus was nailed to at the crucifixion, sometimes also thought to have been built from mistletoe wood, while the crown of thorns was often symbolized with the holly wreath because of its spiky leaves. Winston Graham reports that in a Cornish tradition, mistletoe was originally a fine tree from which the wood of the cross was made, but afterwards it was condemned to live on only as a parasite. In the Tudor period, the tradition was to hang 10 kissing boughs, a wreath or double loop, woven from mistletoe, ash, hazel, or willow, covered in evergreens, and supported an effigy of the baby Jesus in the center. The medieval and early modern English were infamously kissy, as reported by travelers from continental Europe, as an iconic reversal of modern stereotypes, and visitors would be embraced under the bough as a sign of goodwill, leading to the custom of kissing under the mistletoe. The earliest actually documented case of kissing under the mistletoe dates from 16th century England, a custom that was apparently very popular at that time. This does line up with Tudor England being defined as between 1485 and 1603 in England and Wales. That includes the Elizabethan period during the period of Elizabeth I until her death in 1603. There are some new revivals in the Georgian and Victorian eras. It was alluded to as a common practice in 1808 due to the nature of it appearing in a men's shaving ad called Kissing Under the Mistletoe. Under the mistletoe the maid was led, although she cried, no, she held up her head. To obtain a kiss, the sigh was heard. The reason why, Tom rubbed her with his beard. And as described in 1820 by American author Washington Irving in his sketchbook of Geoffrey Cannon Gent, the mistletoe is still hung in the farmhouses and kitchens at Christmas, and the young men have the privilege of kissing the girls under it, plucking each time a berry from the bush. When all the berries are plucked, the privilege ceases. In Germany, the Christmas tradition is that the people who kiss under the mistletoe will have an enduring love or are bound to marry one another, just like in England in the Regency and Victorian eras. In its common use as a Christmas decoration, it's thanks to Charles Dickens and Queen Victoria from her husband, Prince Albert. During the Victorian era, which began in 1837, after the Georgian period in 1714 and ended with Victoria's ascent to the throne, Prince Albert brought many of his home country's, Germany's, holiday traditions over to England. That's why it wasn't mentioned as much in England until the 19th century. The Georgian period included the Regency era, defined as either stretching from 1811 to 1820 or going back from 1795 to 1837. Because of these definitions of the Regency era, Prince George was Prince Regent during the former and included part of King George III's reign and the reigns of his sons George IV and William IV during the latter set of dates. The thanks to Charles Dickens comes from his first novel, The Pickwick Papers, published as a serialized work in 1836. The plot was a loosely based collection of anachronistic newspapers from 1827 and 1828. According to custom, the mistletoe must not touch the ground between its cutting and its removal as the last of the Christmas greens at Candlemas. It may remain hanging throughout the year, often to preserve the house from lightning or fire, until it is replaced the following Christmas Eve. The mistletoe bough from 1794 and before was a simple design, just a sprig tied up and hung from the ceiling. But by Victorian times, the kissing bough was much more complex. 5 circles of wire were joined together to form a globe, and evergreens were bound around the wires to be shaped like a double hoop May garland or crown, which was hung from the middle of the ceiling in the main room. The garland of greenery was adorned with candles, real apples or red apple rosettes of colored paper, and the large bunch of mistletoe hung from the center. It could also be decorated with paper flowers, since there would be few flowers available in England in December. The bough itself is called the mistletoe. The candles were ceremoniously lit on Christmas Eve and then every evening throughout the 12 days of Christmas, which ends on January 6th. Similar to the majority of the aspects of the Christian world's holiday season, the 12 days of Christmas were co-opted to fit the simple Christian elements of celebration until the Magi would have arrived on the Epiphany. The celebration of Yule is even 12 days and 12 nights long, starting on December 20th or December 21st. But even that wasn't the original version. As an example, in Old Norse text, Heimskringla, the saga of Håkon the Good, written by Snorri Sturluson in circa 1230 Iceland, talks about it once lasting for 3 days or as long as the ale lasted. No matter how long it would last, the mistletoe would be hung until and including the new year, or even all 12 months until the new mistletoe would be hung. As a medicine, John Colebatch, moving over to its uses in medicine, John Colebatch, an English apothecary and physician, wrote 2 books on mistletoe in 1719 and 1720. He had a whole section of superstitions and customs associated with mistletoe, but doesn't mention anything about kissing under it. As I mentioned before, it can be toxic. There are numerous debates about the toxicity of mistletoe to humans. There have been cases where ingesting mistletoe leads to vomiting, blurred vision, heartbeat irregularity, and even seizure. Furthermore, domestic animals that have ingested mistletoe can experience diarrhea, vomiting, and seizures. And mistletoe can be lethal for pets as well. Going back centuries, while the sprigs of mistletoe were being hung in doorways, the plant was also being fed to farm animals for the mythological reasons to bless the animals for the coming year, and the medical to realistically keep them fed and healthy during the winter. Therefore, the toxins weren't too strong for the larger animals. Mistletoe, as I mentioned in the ecology section, is a keystone resource in forests. There are some birds that have immunity to the poison and enjoy the berries, especially the mistle thrush, which is named for its favorite food. From the time of Hippocrates, going back as far as 3000 BCE, physicians have recommended mistletoe to cure different diseases. One example is Persians using it to cure epilepsy. Theophrastus was the first to write down his scientific observations on the mistletoe's biology, and then the Greek author Triumbuff wrote about the different types on different trees. For various remedies, the juice could be drawn from the berries, or the powder from leaves, or stems could be made into a drink, plaster, or ointment. In the early 20th century, mistletoe's potential as a cancer treatment was being determined. And while Rudolf Steiner developed the basic concept in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, it was Ito Wegman who was the first physician to specifically apply mistletoe extract in cancer patients. Steiner based his concept on careful observation of morphological patterns, considered polar qualities of mistletoe in summer and winter, and designed unique pharmaceutical processing. These anthroposophic drugs were based on ancient alchemist and homeopathic notions and being produced by fermentation, while others are being produced by high dilution. It was found that oak mistletoe was the most valuable and a very rare medicinal plant, which has been used in cancer therapy since 1927. Due to the limited ability of oak mistletoe, however, a program was launched to safeguard the stocks of oak mistletoe by searching for wild sites in France and by cultivating V. album on Quercus robur and Quercus protraea. However, the jury is still out in the eyes of the medical community whether procedure and the medicines actually work or not. Other than the Europeans utilizing mistletoe extracts for cancer treatments generally as a complementary medicine, the Navajos' past medicinal traditions have used juniper mistletoe to create salves for healing bug bites and warts. While there is a history of the plant's use to cure certain ailments, modern medicine still requires more extensive research. The US has not officially approved the use of mistletoe in treating disease. It further depends on which species of mistletoe one is using to make the medication. The Chinese have incorporated Asian mistletoe into some of their healing practices. In China, the herb is used in puerperal difficulties such as the problems relating to childbirth, like threatened miscarriages, menorrhagia, and insufficient secretion of mother's milk. It's also used in scalp diseases, which has more to do with its possible ability to promote hair growth and difficulties of the external genital organs of women. And when the plant specifically grows on pine and fir trees, it is thought to be antimalarial, antiseptic, diuretic, and somewhat soporific. In India, the plant is thought to be analogous to cinchona bark in intermittent fevers. The blood pressure is said to have been reduced by mistletoe, which also dilates the arteries and capillaries. Like digitalis, it may be given in palpitations of the heart and in epilepsy, and locally, it is applied to immature abscesses. The plant was also sacred to the Amos and Ainu peoples of Japan and to certain tribes in Africa. It has always been surrounded by mystery and superstition. It was a plant that grew without roots in the ground, as though it had fallen from the sky as a divine gift. And as a divine gift, it was likened to the soul because the mistletoe was evergreen. In the northern winters, when the trees seemed to die, the fresh foliage of the mistletoe was a sign of life everlasting. The souls of the trees still lived. So many groups figured that it would be keeping the host plant alive as the all-healer, like the oak tree in the European world, and the sacred willow of the Ainu people in Japan. There's still much more research to be done, and the minds had to be kept open so the non-biased facts could be discovered and shared with the rest of the world. As another use, mistletoe is an ingredient of pomace brandy-based liqueur, or biska, made in Istra, Croatia. Specifically, biska is produced by macerating mistletoe leaves in Istrian brandy, or rakia. Carefully selected branches with leaves are picked during a specific period in spring and autumn, partially dried, and put to macerate in the brandy room at room temperature. And in art, of course we see it all the time during the holidays, but the European was and still is a very popular design, especially in Art Nouveau, due to the separate lines and round berries. It protected against witchcraft and nightmares. It evoked ghosts and caused them to answer your questions. It opened all locks, guarded your stable against trolls, cured epilepsy, warded off death in battle, induced omens of good or bad fortune, and as a divining rod, it pointed to buried gold or treasure. Due to the context of the English tradition of the mistletoe, all of the mythological pieces from ancient Greece and Rome to the originally unconnected Vikings and Druids, puzzle pieces found today can make the picture generally interpretable. But I feel like we're still discovering the pieces. And celebrations no longer celebrated, and stories no longer told. The mistletoe has been used as medicine in traditions across the world for literally centuries, even millennia. Maybe that's a connection to health, life, and vitality. What is always so striking to me is how much there is to uncover. No matter how long the research takes, there is always more to find. There are always more threads to pull at, and that even or especially coincidentally connect or take a parallel route. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Detours in Archaeology. Evergreen is the mistletoe. There's so much more to cover and so many rabbit holes to dive into. So I highly encourage everyone to head over to the connected websites. If you want to skip through the article, you can look at the pictures and then go down to the further reading and citation section for links to so much more information. Since I am nowhere near an expert, it may explain why I wonder what kind of secrets may be floating in the ether of history about gods, goddesses, and spirits of love and healing that all fall under the radar of research which may have had some connection to mistletoe. That website is detoursinarchaeology.com. As always, I deeply apologize for any names and pronunciation of a lot of words that I get wrong. I am trying my best, but I can always do better, and I love to learn to do better and what facts I might have gotten wrong. So if you know any or have any questions or other comment, you can either leave a comment on the podcast app that you're listening to right now. You can once again head over to my website, use the contact page to email me or email me directly. If you want to get updates as to what I'm up to and some extra goodies, you can always follow my website or you can follow my Patreon for free. It is Detours in Archaeology. But the best way you can help me out right now is by rating and reviewing this episode or the podcast. Leave a like, leave a comment, give me some stars, and please share it with everyone you know, friends, coworkers, anyone who might be interested. I'd love to grow this out for more people, and I really, really appreciate it. You can follow me on Instagram to catch the latest photos at Flying Sepida. Sepida is spelled S-E-P-I-I-D-A. It is the family name for cuttlefish without the E at the end. All the music used was by Scott Buckley, who you can find at scottbuckley.com.au. For the fun fact today, fun fact. Now, this is a little bit confusing because Orcanis orca, or killer whale, are dolphins. The orca is the largest species in the Delphinidae family, which is dolphins. However, Delphinidae fall into the infraorder Cetacea. Now within this infraorder, there are two parvorders, the Odontidae and the Mystidae. The Odontidae means toothed whales, Mystidae have baleen. Obviously, orcas fall under the Odontidae, and so technically they are whales, and so are dolphins, so yes, they are whale. We just went in a big old circle. Yay! Of course, they are really good whale killers, which is what they were originally called by old-timey sailors, but over time the name was reordered. You can keep calling them killer whales, but now you know why. If you know any true fun facts, please share them with me and I'll relay them to everyone who listens, and you'll get your own shout out. I'll see you soon for another detour into archaeology. Thanks again! And happy holidays. As on the side. Maybe the 12 days of Christmas relates to 12 months of the year. I don't know. That's something to look into.